In today's episode, we're looking at 3 orca trainers whose time in the water ended in tragedy. From a seasoned trainer caught off guard during a private session in New Zealand, to an ambitious rookie in Florida whose risk-taking turned fatal. But first, we start on the California coast, where a familiar routine inside a packed stadium unraveled in a way no one could stop. August 12, 2017 was one of those heavy California evenings when even the ocean breeze felt thick. At Seabreeze Cove Marine Park, the stadium floodlights blazed against the dusk, casting long shadows across the water. Nearly 3,000 people packed into the stands for Ocean Lights, the park's signature nighttime orca show. Kids clutched souvenir cups, parents fanned themselves with park maps, and speakers pumped out the rhythmic pulse of pre-show music. In the performance pools below, white foam lapped gently at the sides. Everything felt easy, familiar, safe. But in the wild and even in captivity, familiarity is never a guarantee. Under the surface, the instincts of the ocean never really disappear. Backstage, the trainers moved through final checks. A few staff exchanged uneasy glances. Kai, the orca scheduled for the show's finale, had been slow to respond during rehearsals, hovering at the gates longer than usual, jaw-popping between routines. The behavior was noted, but with a full stadium waiting and no outright refusals, the decision was made to move forward. It was a familiar risk, one they had taken before. Behind the scenes, Maya Ellison adjusted the fit of her wetsuit and pulled her long braid over one shoulder. At 31, she wasn't just a senior trainer, she was the one others watched. The one who stayed calm when sessions went sideways, the one who could coax a nervous calf back onto the platform with nothing more than a quiet hand signal. Outside of work, she was the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday, hiked alone just to photograph wildflowers, and rescued stray dogs she couldn't afford to keep. She was respected, deeply liked, and most importantly, trusted by the animal she trained. Seabreeze Cove was built into the rocky curves of the California coastline, a sprawling mix of performance stadiums, research labs, and shaded public spaces. It catered to tourists and locals alike, advertising dolphin encounters, sunset kayak tours, and conservation talks. But the park's main draw, the real reason most visitors came, was the Orca program. Giant saltwater pools stretched across the property, connected by a complex system of gates and underwater tunnels. Here, under the pounding music and dazzling lights, generations of trainers had spent their careers, and generations of orcas had been born, raised, and trained within the confines of the park. Kai was one of them. Born in human care, he was the product of a breeding program that had once promised to bridge the gap between captivity and conservation. Raised in the interconnected pools of Seabreeze Cove, he had never known the open ocean. To trainers, he was a familiar presence, intelligent, highly food-motivated, and usually reliable under pressure, but prone to stubbornness when overstimulated. At over 22 feet long and weighing nearly 6,000 pounds, he carried the easy confidence of a seasoned performer capable of hitting every mark flawlessly or refusing a cue without warning. In recent months, small signs of agitation had begun to surface. Delayed responses, increased surface slaps, occasional food refusals. Nothing alarming enough to pull him from shows, but enough that the most experienced trainers like Maya watched him a little more closely than the others. By the time the show began at 8:15 p.m., Kai was already circling in the main pool, his towering dorsal fin slicing through the surface. Tonight's finale was a crowd favorite, a sequence of synchronized breaches followed by Maya standing atop Kaya's back, riding him across the stadium tank under a sweep of blue lights. To the audience, it looked effortless. To the trainers, it was the product of thousands of careful, cautious hours. Orcas, often called killer whales, are apex predators with instincts sharpened by millions of years of evolution. In captivity, trainers rely on trust, positive reinforcement, and repetition to manage that power. But no amount of training can erase the wild instincts lurking just beneath the surface. A wrong cue, a sudden slip, and all of that trust could vanish in an instant. Maya waded waist-deep into the pool, gave the surf mount cue, and braced herself. Knees bent, arms out, eyes locked on Kai as he arched toward her. Across the pool, his white eye patches gleamed under the stadium lights as he surged forward. Maya had done this maneuver hundreds of times before, but tonight something shifted. As Kai surfaced beneath her, she caught the hesitation too late. Her foot skidded sideways along his slick flank and her center of gravity pitched off balance. For a heartbeat, she tried to shift her weight back, reaching instinctively to steady herself, but the momentum was already lost. She struck hard against Kai's side near his pectoral fin. Kai twisted sharply, clamping his jaws around Maya's leg and pulling downward. The audience clapped, mistaking it for a daring new move. Even the announcer faltered mid-sentence, unsure whether to continue. From the stands, all they could see was a flurry of white water, and Maya's arm briefly flailing before she disappeared beneath the surface. Trainers stationed around the perimeter moved instantly, blowing emergency recall whistles and slapping the water hard with open palms, trying to trigger Kai's disengage behavior. But there was no break in his grip. Beneath the surface, Maya fought to reach the air. Kaya dragged her in tight, brutal circles, performing what marine experts call a deep tow, a maneuver wild orcas use to drown struggling prey. She resurfaced once, gasping for air, one arm reaching upward before Kai surged and slammed her sideways into the water again. The viewing platforms rocked under the force of the splash, and the silence in the stands broke into a wave of screaming. Backup divers scrambled into position. Emergency gates lowered into the pool designed to herd Kai into an isolation pen. But he wasn't following the usual patterns. He hovered near the far wall, pressing Maya against the concrete, occasionally lifting her to the surface only to drag her under moments later. Blood swirled in the foam under the floodlights, staining the whitecaps pink. One diver managed to get close enough to brush Maya's arm but had to retreat when Kai swung wide, sending a surge of water crashing over the dock. Every second stretched impossibly long. Food lures were tossed, underwater blast horns were triggered, but Kai ignored it all. When Kai finally released her, Maya floated face down. Her wetsuit was torn, her body limp, one leg bent unnaturally at the knee. Divers seized the chance, pulling her to the nearest platform and immediately beginning CPR. Chest compressions rocked her narrow frame. Oxygen masks were pressed to her face. Trainers barked out commands, switching positions, refusing to give up. But the injuries were devastating. Broken ribs, a punctured lung, massive internal bleeding. Every passing minute stacked the odds against her. When paramedics arrived, the stands had already been cleared, leaving only the echo of running feet and urgent radio calls behind. The water lay still, broken only by the slow sweep of searchlights moving across the empty pool. Maya was loaded into an ambulance and rushed to the nearest trauma center. But by the time the doctors reached her, there was nothing left to save. She was pronounced dead within the hour. The official cause of death was listed as blunt force trauma and drowning. Internal reviews revealed what had gone unnoticed too long. Kai's behavioral changes over the past 2 weeks, slow response times, delayed disengagements, small refusals, had been noted but not escalated. There had been warnings, just not loud enough to stop the show. Seabreeze Cove canceled all physical surf tricks immediately after the incident. Trainers were prohibited from entering the water during performances. Emergency protocols were rewritten to require intervention at the first sign of behavioral drift, not after. Maya's colleagues held a private ceremony overlooking the cliffs where the ocean met the rocks, a place she loved to hike alone, camera slung over one shoulder, always chasing the first wildflowers of the season. They remembered her not just as a trainer, but as the person who stayed late to comfort a nervous calf, who left notes of encouragement taped to locker doors before big shows, who never lost her awe for the animals she worked with. Her wetsuit and training log were quietly placed in a glass case inside the staff break room, a simple plaque beneath them reading, "For Maya, who never stopped believing in them." Maya's death exposed the risks hidden inside even the most carefully controlled performances. For Will Tarongi in New Zealand, it wasn't a packed stadium that proved fatal. It was a private session, a moment of routine that turned violent in seconds. August 6, 2012 dawned cold and silver gray over the coast of New Zealand's North Island. At Aoraki Marine Park, a fine mist clung to the surface of the training pools, swirling between the stadium bleachers and the salt-rusted railings. There was no crowd yet, only the slap of seawater against concrete and the faint cry of gulls drifting over the cliffs. Mornings like this were routine, the kind that make the work feel almost predictable. But in the narrow space between routine and instinct, predictability never lasts for long. Wiramu Tarangi, known to most as Will, zipped up his wetsuit and jogged down the side path toward the performance pools, his breath clouding faintly in the crisp morning air. At 28, he was still young by senior trainer standards, but respected for his patience, steady hands, and quiet way of commanding attention without ever raising his voice. Will wasn't flashy, he didn't crave the spotlight. He was the type who stayed late to patch ripped wetsuits, who sketched orcas in the margins of his training logs, who loaned out his spare jackets when a junior trainer forgot theirs. He liked early mornings, long hikes in the hills where he grew up, and photography. His battered old camera was rarely far from reach, stuffed between bags of frozen fish or tucked into his locker. On his days off, he volunteered at a native bird sanctuary north of Auckland, sometimes driving hours just to repair fences or rebuild old nest boxes. Around the park, he was known as steady, good-natured, and unfailingly reliable, the one you trusted without thinking twice. He wasn't reckless. If anything, he was methodical, a trait that made what happened all the harder to comprehend. Aoraki Marine Park stretched across a rugged inlet just beyond Taronga, a sprawling mix of educational exhibits, small aquariums, and a main show pool that served as the heart of the operation. Opened in the early 1990s, the park earned a quiet reputation for blending Maori conservation principles with Western marine science. Even though behind the marketing slogans, it operated much like any other tourist-centered attraction. Giant saltwater tanks connected by steel gates dominated the center, while shaded walkways and viewing platforms looped around the property. Orcas were the crown jewel of the park, and no star shone brighter than Taku. Taku had been born in captivity at another facility and transferred to Aoraki Marine Park at the age of 3. By the time he reached maturity, he weighed nearly 5,500 pounds and stretched almost 20 feet from rostrum to tail. He was clever, fast, and highly trainable, but carried a reputation for unpredictability. Trainers described him as playful but easily overstimulated, prone to shifting from cooperation to sudden burst of roughhousing. In recent months, Taku's behavior had been flagged several times: incomplete responses, surface lunges during feeding, slow reaction to secondary reinforcement cues. Notes were added to his logs, but with no serious incidents, his public performances and private sessions continued without interruption. That morning, Will's assignment was straightforward. A solo early session run to rehearse a new breach routine where Taku would leap dramatically next to a stationary platform on a silent hand cue. No tricks requiring close contact, no mounted rides, just water work and surface behaviors. It should have been low risk. Orcas are masters of calculated aggression, capable of incredible patience and explosive violence when triggered. In the wild, they spend hours stalking prey, testing boundaries before delivering a final fatal strike. In captivity, training programs rely on predictability, reinforced behaviors, rehearsed cues, layered trust. But trust is not instinct. Even the most experienced orca can shift in a breath if frustration, confusion, or overstimulation overrides conditioning. When that happens, trainers have no warning and no second chances. Will stepped onto the submerged platform, gave the ready signal, and watched as Taku slid smoothly through the water to position. The first few breaches went as planned, high, clean arcs with minimal splash. But even then, something felt slightly off. Taku surfaced harder than usual, landing with a heavy slap that sent deeper ripples across the pool. His vocalizations were louder too, short, low bursts that echoed against the concrete walls. Will reset the cue and waved again, expecting another perfect pass. Instead of veering wide toward the open water, Taku pivoted sharply, angling his body in an abrupt, unnatural line toward the platform. His movements tightened, faster and more direct than the controlled speed the behavior usually demanded. The collision happened faster than anyone could react. Taku's body struck Will broadside with the force of a speeding car, knocking him off the platform and into the water. Disoriented, Will kicked toward the surface, gasping as he broke through, only to feel a crushing grip clamp around his torso. From the viewing deck, the few staff on duty saw the splash, the flailing, and the dark shape circling below. Emergency recall signals blasted from handheld horns as trainers tossed buckets of fish into the water trying to lure Taku away. But the Orca didn't respond. In the pool, Will struggled, twisting against the tightening pressure around his ribs. Taku dragged him under again, mouthing at his midsection, a behavior normally playful among juveniles, but here it escalated with terrifying speed into deep puncture bites and powerful rolling tugs. On the surface, trainers initiated emergency procedures, shouting across radios to lock down all connected pools. A safety diver sprinted toward the emergency entry point, but Taku remained between Will and any rescue attempt. The water around them frothed with movement, darkening with blood. Taku surfaced briefly, Will limp against his side, before diving again in a tight circle that slammed the trainer into the gate wall. When Taku finally released him, Will floated face down near the center of the pool, unmoving. For a few long seconds, Taku lingered nearby, circling slowly under the surface, brushing his dorsal fin against Will's body as if unwilling to let go completely. Trainers at the edge kept slapping the water and tossing fish, trying to lure him away, but he ignored every signal. When a diver in full rescue gear entered the water, Taku reacted almost instantly, lunging once toward the disturbance, creating a shockwave that pushed the rescuer back toward the wall. It took two more divers, coordinated from opposite sides of the pool, to finally herd Taku into the adjoining gate tunnel and close the emergency barrier behind him. With Taku secured, the rescue team rushed to Will. Two staff divers hauled him onto the submerged platform while another trainer clambered over the side to begin CPR, chest compressions, rescue breathing, frantic shouted timings. The team worked mechanically, barely speaking except to count compressions and ventilations. Blood clouded the water around them, mixing into the foam. Despite their efforts, it was clear within minutes how grave his injuries were. When paramedics arrived, Will was moved onto a backboard, but he was pronounced dead at the scene before they could even begin transport. The internal review was swift and damning. Safety protocols required two trainers to be present for any in-water session, especially with Taku's known behavioral flags. The park admitted procedural negligence and immediately suspended all water entry work pending a full overhaul. Taku was placed on a restricted schedule, limited to dry stage training only. In the days that followed, Aoraki Marine Park hosted a closed memorial for staff. Friends and colleagues remembered Will as steady, kind, and unfailingly patient. The one who stayed behind after shows to repair broken props, the one who left spare jackets in his locker in case a coworker forgot theirs, the one who believed that with enough time and respect, anything could be taught. His loss left a hole in the tight-knit staff that could never really be filled. Will's tragedy came from trust built over years of experience. For Sarah Kim, it was the opposite. A rush to prove herself, a risk taken without the time or training to understand what was waiting beneath the surface. March 17, 2011 was one of those mornings that seemed too perfect to end badly. At Clearwater Cove Marine Park, the saltwater show lagoon stretched wide under a flawless blue sky, gleaming in the early sun. Trainers moved briskly across the docks, preparing harnesses and running pre-show sound tests. The kind of routine that felt so normal it became easy to forget what kind of power they worked beside. The water was calm, the day felt easy. But in places like this, it's often the calmest days that fall apart the fastest. Sarah Kim zipped up her wetsuit and jogged barefoot along the main platform, flashing a quick thumbs up to the technician by the rail. At 24, she was one of the park's youngest open water trainers, a rising star pushed into the spotlight faster than most. She was also the daughter of Clearwater Cove's newly appointed operations manager, a former public aquarium executive brought in to modernize the park's image and cut rising maintenance costs. Staff veterans had their doubts. Sarah had the natural energy and the easy charm that looked good during shows, but she didn't have the years of hard experience most trainers earned before stepping into the lagoon. Some whispered that she hadn't earned her clearance, others said it didn't matter anymore. Sarah didn't hide from the talk. If anything, she thrived on it. She was bold where others hesitated, eager where others were cautious, and quick to take risks that made her both admired and quietly resented. New trainers looked up to her. Senior ones kept a wary distance. Clearwater Cove wasn't a sprawling marine empire like the ones farther south. It was smaller, older, built along the edge of a protected bay with aging infrastructure hidden behind smiling brochures. The saltwater pools and show lagoons offered dolphins, sea lions, and one orca with limited access to open water through submerged gates and perimeter nets. To guests, it looked open and natural. To trainers, it was clear that the nets were wearing thin. The gates were sluggish and the staff was stretched thinner than ever. Budget cuts had trimmed back maintenance and supervision. Safety concerns had been raised about the perimeter netting and the erratic behavior of certain animals. But without a high-profile incident of force action, most warnings sank into paperwork and were quietly filed away. At the heart of Clearwater's marine program was Makoa, a massive 24-foot, 7,000-pound male orca captured decades earlier in the North Atlantic. He had been moved from park to park before ending up here, and over time he developed a reputation as calculating, proud, and quick to frustration. Trainers had flagged multiple behavior issues, slow responses, refusal to station, jaw-popping near docks. Small red flags that added together painted a larger, worrying picture. In recent months, some senior trainers had refused to enter the water with him at all. Sarah, eager to prove herself, volunteered without hesitation. That morning's assignment was meant to be straightforward, a solo free swim exercise reinforcing surface targeting and stationing behaviors. No mounted rides, no tricks, just a simple swim in the open lagoon. Sarah gave the ready signal as she slipped into the water, her body cutting cleanly through the surface. On the far side of the lagoon, Makoa surfaced, his dorsal fin slicing the still water. The first few interactions went smoothly. A target touch, a slow roll, a fluke slap. Watching from the side decks, the on-duty supervisors relaxed. It looked like any other session. Sarah gave the hand cue for a high-energy recall, slapping the water sharply. Makoa responded immediately, but not the way anyone expected. He accelerated toward her, building momentum with powerful strokes. For a heartbeat, it looked impressive, until it didn't. Instead of surfacing into a clean touch, Makoa threw his entire mass forward, slamming his rostrum into Sarah's waist with a force that felt like it cracked the air itself. She crumpled sideways and hit the water hard, the impact lost beneath the roar of the crowd and the shriek of startled whistles. Disoriented, she fought to surface, kicking hard, but Makoa was already there. He lunged again, clamping his jaws around her thigh and yanking her under. Sarah twisted violently, thrashing with her free leg, but the orca's grip was iron. Above her, the world blurred into streaks of light and shadow. Trainers on the docks erupted into motion. Emergency horns blared, buckets of fish were hurled toward the far side of the lagoon, air horns shrieked across the surface. But Makoa ignored them all. He dragged Sarah in a brutal arc across the pool, shaking her side to side with violent head tosses that sent sprays of blood into the air. Rescue divers plunged into the water, launching an emergency stretcher, but the platform never had a chance. Makoa slammed it aside with a single surge. One diver managed to get close enough to brush Sarah's arm, but a sudden sweep of Makoa's tail forced them back under the dock. Another tried to blind him with a flash of underwater light, but the orca dodged easily, his attention locked fully on the limp figure in his grip. The struggle stretched on. Divers worked in coordinated bursts using poles and buoy barriers to try to herd Makoa toward the isolation gate. It took 3 agonizing minutes, 3 minutes of blood spreading in the water before a narrow opening appeared. 2 divers surged forward, grabbing Sarah's body and hauling her onto the floating dock. Her leg was shredded. Her torso was mottled with deep bruises and puncture wounds. She wasn't breathing. CPR began immediately. One diver administered compressions while another managed the airway, forcing oxygen into collapsed lungs as a third counted off timing. Blood seeped between the slats of the dock, staining the water below in a thin pink wash. They worked with brutal mechanical urgency, switching every 2 minutes, refusing to give up. But the damage was catastrophic. A collapsed lung, a fractured pelvis, massive internal bleeding, and multiple crush injuries to the rib cage. Despite continuous efforts, Sarah was pronounced dead within 10 minutes of being pulled from the water. When the paramedics finally stepped away, no words were spoken. Trainers stood frozen on the dock, wetsuits dripping, radios slack at their sides. The lagoon, moments ago alive with shouting and alarms, lay eerily still under the mid-morning sun. It was as if nothing had happened at all, except for the blood still swirling just beneath the surface. Internal investigations later confirmed that Sarah had never fully completed the open water certification protocols normally required for unsupervised sessions. Management had fast-tracked her clearance under pressure to modernize the park's public image. Warnings about Makoa's escalating agitation had been filed, but never escalated beyond internal logs, and by the time anyone revisited those warnings, it was too late. The free swim program was dismantled quietly in the following weeks. Sarah's name was removed from promotional materials. Staff manuals were rewritten without acknowledgement of what had happened. Among the trainers who stayed, her memory lived on, not in plaques or dedications, but in whispers passed down to the next wave. No solo swims, no fast-tracked clearances, no second chances. Because when trust fails in the water, there's no time to fix it. Only the final moment when it breaks. Thanks for watching this video. If you love this video, you'll definitely also love the one on your end screen right now. Hope to see you there.